Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. I'm just going to let participants join in while I plug my earphones in. So welcome to everybody. I'll wait a couple of seconds while people have time just to join us and then we'll get started. So hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Just while we're waiting for people to join, I will just go through some intros. I'll go through the agenda for today and some basic housekeeping as well. So firstly, thank you for joining. Welcome to the session today. This is the final one in a month-long series of lunch and learn sessions all around the bid process and developing bid skills, etc. For those that haven't joined me on a webinar before, my name is Gillian Askew. I'm your host for the session today, and I'm one of 3 co-founders of Go for Growth who are laying on this webinar for you today. So before we get started, some housekeeping stuff. We are recording the session today as is usual for us on Zoom. A copy of the recording will be available on our YouTube channel. It will be in the Bid Skills playlist. You can find it there, or you can find it just on the main YouTube channel. But as a registered attendee, you'll get a copy of the video recording sent to you via email. You'll also get a copy of these slides. And there are some links that I'm referring to in the slide deck today. So I'll also send out any of the external links to external guidances or documents that we've been pulling information from. So they'll all come out with the slides as well. Again, as we're on Zoom, there is a chat function and a Q&A function. Feel free to use both. Hopefully both are working. The chat functionality seems to be disabled on one of the lunch and learn sessions. So hopefully both are working okay. We have got some time set aside at the end for Q&A, but if you've got any questions as I go through today, please do feel free to ask them on the Q&A functionality. I'll either try and answer them as they come up, or I'll pick them up towards the end if I haven't caught them on the way through. If you would like to say hi and introduce yourself, please feel free to do so on the chat functionality. If that's not working, you can do it on Q&A. If you are using chat, I think you need to just check that it's set to who you want to see it. So that might be hosts and panelists only, or everyone. If you do have specific questions about the topic today, if I can ask you to put them in Q&A, that would be super helpful. But I will try and keep an eye on both chat and Q&A. So in today's lunch and learn session, for the next sort of 15 minutes or so, I'll be covering the feedback process. So I'm going to talk through what it is as a public sector bidder, what you should expect from that feedback process, how you might use that feedback. And I'll also cover what to do if you think the outcome is either incorrect or if the process hasn't been run fairly or appropriately either. So that's what we're covering today. Hopefully everyone's in the right place. And so if we move into feedback, every competitive procurement, you should get feedback. You will get notified, obviously, whether you've been successful or unsuccessful, but you should also get some feedback that accompanies that. I think feedback is really important. I'm a procurement professional by trade, 30 years in. It's important not just for bidders, but also for procurers. It helps us to understand how we've set our procurement out. The responses tell us a little bit about how we've put our procurement together. It tells us about market capability. It's a real opportunity in procurement to understand if what we're asking for through the specification is able to be delivered quite in the way we'd envisaged it from a procurement perspective. But it's also really important to bidders, especially if you've been unsuccessful, to understand where the gaps were. But even if you were successful, to know what made you successful so you can build on those things for the future. And there was some guidance on bid evaluation that was issued by the government commercial function, and this will be put in the link for you with the slides coming out. It was back in May 2021. I think it's still valid. Section 10 of that guidance is all about the feedback process. And what it says in that guidance, and this is guidance for procurement in the public sector to utilise, that guidance says good feedback to bidders can be extremely useful to bidders by helping them to understand what they did well, what they could have done better, and points to consider for the future. It goes on to say that it's best practice to consider some particular points when providing feedback to bidders. And those points, and this is the guidance for the regulations as they stand today, which is public procurement regulations, the public contract regulations of 2015, PCR 2015. So things to consider are including details of the evaluation approach and scoring criteria, the bidder's score, but also the winner's score, for each of those sub-criteria. It's recommended that that could be in tabulated format so that it's really easy and simple to understand, but also to be able to act upon that feedback. And the use of specific examples from the bid to make the feedback as practical and as relevant as possible to those that are getting it. And sometimes when you're in a public procurement process, you might be offered detailed feedback verbally. What that means is you might be offered a meeting where you have the opportunity to ask questions and discuss your feedback, or be given that feedback verbally as well as in writing. And so the guidance says actually that procurers should notify bidders when verbal or oral feedback would be provided or would not be provided at all. And that's all about managing bidders' expectations as they go into these processes. So that's all about kind of how it stands at the minute, and you can read that guidance at your leisure. There's lots more information than we've got time to cover today, and that link will be sent out to you. But of course, we in the UK are no longer part of the European Economic Union post-Brexit. And so what we are doing at the moment is going through a process of putting the public procurement regulatory environment together. So that was a consultative process which kicked off a good while back now with a green paper that came out where businesses and procurers could consult that process. That's now going through Parliament. It's had its second reading. It's due to have its third reading, and hopefully the regulations will be assented to law sometime, I think, around spring 2024. But under those proposed changes post this consultation period around debrief letters, there could be some changes in there that are pretty important. So I wanted to cover what it could look like as soon as in a year's time versus what it should look like today. So, and I stress that these are proposed changes, so they may still be subject to change. But in all cases, both now and in the future, there's an award notification that happens. So there's a contract award notice that a contracting authority is obliged to do. And basically that confirms the authority's intention to award a contract. In the future, that will notify the market of the outcome of the procurement. It will include the anticipated contract value, description of the contract, and the identity of all bidders. It's proposed also that it will detail in that award notice the standstill period. And I'm going to talk about the standstill period as a specific part of the process in a couple of slides' time. It's also proposed that when the contracting authority releases that award notice and therefore signalling their intent to award the contract, what they'll additionally do is provide all participants of the bid process with the evaluation documents for the winning bidder. They'll be redacted for commercial sensitivity, but you will get the evaluation documents for the winning bidder. What that should include in those evaluation documents, therefore, is the winning bidder's scores, but also an explanation or justification of those scores. All bidders will also be provided with their own unredacted evaluation documents. And that's to enable all bidders to be able, who were unsuccessful, to be able to compare the relative advantages of the winning bid against your own bid. So you'll get your score, the justification explanation for your score versus the score of the winning bidder and the explanation justification for their score. So you can compare those two things together. In addition to that, contracting authorities may choose, if they want to provide individual debrief letters to bidders, which may include feedback on improving performance, but that might not be appropriate or possible in all circumstances. So it might be that the feedback process is about the evaluation score and the explanation for why those scores were given in the future. But right now, under PCR 15, you should get obviously notified of whether you're successful or not. If you weren't the winning bidder, you should get your score versus the winning bidder's score, and you should hopefully get enough detailed feedback and good quality feedback so that you're able to do something with that feedback. And if we just think about that in a little bit more detail, it's our view that good feedback can be a real game changer for businesses. As I said before, not just for bidders, but for procurement, when you get good feedback, what we're effectively trying to do is enable the market to help us develop good procurements going forward. From a procurement perspective, that's what you really want. You want to work with the market. And so giving feedback is an opportunity to talk to the market about what it is that you're trying to procure and understanding how the market has responded to that procurement event. And with every competition, there's a chance that you would be successful or unsuccessful. There are different types of procurement in the public sector. So a lot of the contracts that are offered, whether they're through a framework or a specific contract, you might have a one-time only opportunity to be successful. There are things called dynamic frameworks or dynamic purchasing systems where if you're unsuccessful, you can retry because the procurement opportunity remains open, but often they close. So if you get in, you get in. If you don't, you don't. And either way, that good feedback is really important for all organisations involved, I think, regardless of size or sector, but especially for micro or smaller organisations or the voluntary sector who are not bidding all of the time. That isn't necessarily the core skill, and might not have dedicated resources. The feedback process, if it's used effectively by bidders, it can really enable learning and improvements to be made to apply for future opportunities. And ultimately, what that means is you are maximising your chances of winning new opportunities in the future. I don't know if as a bidder you would be aware, but you know the feedback environment is a regulated area. So how feedback's given to you does fall under the regulations. I've talked through how it stands today and how it might look in the future. But I'm telling us that now because really what that means is that contracting authorities who your contract would be with do take care and time when producing feedback. So challenges have and can be made to contracting authorities around unsatisfactory feedback processes. So it is an area where contracting authorities can and probably will take legal advice and guidance. And I say that as a positive because we want contracting authorities to think really carefully and seriously about the feedback that they give to organisations. We in Go for Growth recently recommended on a piece of work that we did with the London Anchor Institution Network, but this recommendation is for all public sector. We recommended that wherever possible, detailed feedback should be given to bidders. That feedback shouldn't be limited to here was your score, here was the winning score, that it should be much broader than that. But it should always include the bidder score versus the winning bidder score. And at the very least, a summary of where marks were lost, an overview of what was missing and what would have enabled higher scores. Again, it's our recommendation to the public sector that where appropriate, verbal feedback sessions should be offered so that there is an opportunity to have some of that discussion around the feedback that's been given. You can see on screen a couple of things. So you can see on screen to the left-hand side some examples of good feedback. This is real feedback. It's redacted for obvious reasons. But you can see on the third one down, project plan and project resources, what the contracting authority in this case has tried to do is give an overview of what was good about the successful tenderer's response to that question. So they've gone into some detail. The project plan reflected an understanding and ability to deliver outcomes, KPIs and monitoring were there, the needs assessment, technical sessions, The successful tender had good experience of engaging sectors beyond professional services. So it really tries to say this is why the score was the way it was. And it also then tries to say bidder A's proposal presented areas that were out of scope for requirement. They might want greater focus on supporting businesses over information on barriers. The successful tenderer demonstrated greater sector engagement. So what this feedback is trying to do is say, this is where the winning bidder was good, and this is what you could have filled the gap with. This was the gap in your response and why there was a difference in the question. And this really, I think, and we'll wait and see until the new regulations actually are agreed and come out and we start getting them in practice. But I think this is likely to be how you might get feedback going forward. So you'll get that explanation of the score for the winning bidder and also an explanation of the score for you. So you can have a look at those gaps if you're unsuccessful, and if you're successful, you can build on them. And the same for budgeting, budget breakdown and pricing. You can see what the successful tenderer did versus what bidder A, who was unsuccessful, did as well. And that is, it's obviously not pages and pages, so it doesn't have to be War and Peace or novel length of feedback, but it does allow the bidder at least to have a think about where they might be able to improve for future. We can also see on screen what providers are telling us. So not that long ago, Go for Growth polled 100 bidders specifically about the feedback process. And actually, I'm going to start with the bottom number. So 35%, so 35 of those 100 bidders said that they had not received any feedback at all. So beyond you were successful or unsuccessful, there was nothing that came with it. No scores, nothing, just you didn't get it or you did. 51%, so 51 in 100 said they had been only given scores but no detailed feedback. So here's what my score was, here's what the winning bidder score was, but no reasoning behind any of it. And when we asked 37%, so 37 of those 100 bidders had said actually that they would want to proactively use the feedback to learn and improve for future opportunities. And so that tells us that, you know, bidders in over a third of cases treat the feedback process as really serious. And obviously that becomes more important sometimes when you're unsuccessful, because what we're trying to do is grow the sector, and we can't do that if we don't know what we're missing. So that's some stats for you to think about. So we mentioned the contract award notice would trigger a standstill period. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with the standstill period. If you're new to public procurement, you might not be aware of what a standstill period is. Effectively, every contracting authority should observe a standstill period when making a contract award. Now, there are some exceptions to that. So if there is an award being made on the grounds of extreme, unavoidable urgency or to protect life, then that might not apply. But generally speaking, the standstill period would be applied after every competitive procurement. And it's triggered through that publication of the contract award notice, which is the notice that is made publicly by the contracting authority of who they intend to award to. What it means in practical terms is if you've bid to join a contract, you will have been notified whether you've been successful or unsuccessful. You will have had your feedback, the scores, etc. Whatever you're getting, you will have got. And then the standstill period would start. And I'm going to talk about what to do if you're unhappy with that result. But I'm going to start by saying, what do I mean by unhappy? So what I don't mean is I'm fed up that I didn't win this contract. You know, I'm fed up that I wasn't successful. If you are unhappy with an outcome, what I'm meaning in terms of context is that you believe that the outcome is fundamentally wrong, that you've been scored incorrectly or unfairly, for example, or you disagree fundamentally with the feedback that you've been given, or that you believe that the process has been run incorrectly or unfairly. And that standstill period, therefore, is your opportunity to challenge the feedback, to challenge the scores, to challenge the process. And I'll talk about PPRS because you can invoke that at any time, but that standstill period is your time to say, I don't agree with this. I think this is wrong. And you would challenge that in writing, and you would do that through the procurement portal. All your comms would go through the procurement portal because that creates a solid audit trail, both for you, but for the contracting authority as well. Now, that procurement bill that I've talked about that is going through Parliament at the moment, that's proposing, it was so made a whole section set aside for contract award and standstill, and I'll send a link out with the slides. But basically, in section 5, subsection 51, it clarifies that the standstill period on awarded contracts means that the contracting authority may not enter into a public contract before the end of the mandatory standstill period. That's exactly as it is today also. The contracting authority can't do that. They have to observe the standstill period. The standstill period is a period, a minimum period, a mandatory standstill period is a minimum period of 8 working days, and it begins on the day that the contract award notice is published in respect of the contract. So with the weekend, it usually works out as a 10-day period. And I thought it was worth mentioning that you might hear some people refer to it as the Alcatel period, although I hear it much less now than I used to do. But it only became known as the Alcatel period because of a pair of linked European cases. But if people say to you there's an Alcatel period of 10 days, what they mean is there's a standstill period of 10 days. There have been remedies set aside in the procurement bill, as there are usual, as you would expect, where contracts are entered into before standstill has been completed. You can have a look at that when we send the link out. It's section 104, subsection B. But in addition to that standstill period, there is the Public Procurement Review Service, PPRS, and there's a link on the screen to them, and there'll be a link in the documents that come out also. Basically, the Public Procurement Review Service is one of a range of measures, and it's designed to help make the public sector easier to work with. It's designed to help suppliers and particularly smaller organisations or VCSEs, voluntary sector, and it's attempting to make sure that the playing field is level for those who want to supply the public sector. The role of PPRS is to investigate public sector procurement processes, highlighting any improvements that could be made by buyers. It's a free service and it's available for any supplier to use. So PPRS can help businesses who feel that they might have been treated unfairly during a tender, or if they've got concerns about the conduct of a procurement process. And actually, the work that PPRS does is, you know, it's real, and it has led to live procurements being adjusted, recommendations being made to contracting authorities. It has led to improvements in the way that the government sources goods and services in the future. And just as an aside, although it's not part of feedback, to be fair, but PPRS also handles cases concerning late payment of any valid and undisputed invoices on a public sector contract. So if you're struggling with payment, PPRS can help. I mean, these tools are here to try and ensure that the public sector procurement space is run as well as it can. They are there to help buyers as well as suppliers. And our advice would be, don't be afraid to use them. Now, of course, and actually the Cabinet Office are really keen for providers to know that PPRS is there, and it's really keen for suppliers to use them when it's right and appropriate to do so. And I guess that's the final message on things like challenge and asking for PPRS to review a process for you. They are there, they're there to help us as providers and as procurers, so do feel free to use them, but use them well and use them appropriately. And as is always the case with any of this, our advice would be utilise them, but make sure you do so with proper thought and consideration. And I think that was everything that I was going to cover on the feedback process. I know it is a really rapid short fire session, so there's a whole lot more detail that you can have a read through in the links that we send out with the slides, but I will take any questions if anybody has got any. Let me just have a quick look. So there's nothing in the chat, nothing in the Q&A as it stands at the minute, but do obviously feel free to chuck anything in there if you would like to. What you can see on the screen on this final slide There's my contact details and my colleague Lauren's contact details, and also our website is there. On our website, you can link through to our YouTube channel. If you've got questions and you would prefer to come to myself or Lauren outside of this session, please feel free to fire us an email over. If as soon as we end this session, you think of 40,000 questions that you didn't think of at the time, please don't hesitate to drop us a note. You can get in touch with either myself or my colleague Lauren, and we'll answer the questions as quickly as we can. And I know time is really precious, and especially if you are a provider, and especially if you're working on bids at the minute. So I won't hold us here if there aren't any questions from the session today. So all that remains for me to say is thank you ever so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking time out of what is no doubt a really busy day. It might be a couple of days before the slide deck and the PDF and a copy of the recording comes out to you, but please do feel free to get in touch, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Thank you. See you next time.